It begins, as all ends do, with the soft rustling of dust against old stone. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the great city of Rome, not in her golden youth, not beneath the laurels of Julius Caesar, or in the brilliance of Augustus's vision, but in her tired and twilight years, the 4th century after Christ, and the empire's heart has grown weary. The air is heavy with the scent of tired marble, dry olives, and faint incense trailing from the chapels of 1,000 gods and a single one. The sun no longer crowns Rome in glory, but bathes it in a dim, golden resignation. The gates of the city, once magnificent and defiant, now stand like aging sentinels, still proud, yet chipped and corroded, moss crawling up their base like the fingers of time itself. The clamour of voices is no longer the confident Latin of Cicero's time, but a tangled whisper of languages, Gothic, Greek, Syriac, and crude, drifting Latin, like a song long forgotten and half remembered. Would you last a day here? You, with your soft-soled shoes, your clean water from taps, your sense of safety and medicine that heals rather than maims. You would feel it instantly, the weight of a world sliding toward its dusk. Rome, in her final century, was a city heavy with ghosts and with burdens. Here, the aqueducts still function, some of them. Water still flows, though it is often brown or slow. And the people still walk the same streets, narrow and uneven, slick, with age and refuse. But their eyes are different, wide, watchful, hungry not for food, but for signs, omens. The empire is full of signs now. The emperor, whoever he might be this year, is far from here, perhaps in Ravenna, walled off by marsh and politics, or in Milan, trying to hold the north. He is no longer the shepherd of the people, but a shadow wrapped in silk, a man surrounded by soldiers of barbarian tongue, praying to a Christian god or invoking the old ways in secret, hoping something, anything, will make Rome whole again. If you walked these streets, you might marvel first at the clutter, the ruins of old temples beside makeshift market stalls, statues toppled not by time, but by decree, their heads broken as faiths changed and changed again. The Christians have come into power, but not all believe the same way. Arians whisper heresies that rival bishops condemn in heated sermons. And beneath it all, the old gods linger, unspoken but not forgotten, in the folds of household shrines and rural festivals. You would find the people gaunt, not just in body, but in spirit. Taxed into despair, they sell heirlooms for grain, work, lands they no longer own, serve lords they do not choose. The senators' robes still trail fine threads, but many of their houses stand hollow, walls echoing with the past, floors riddled with weeds. The greatness of Rome is now a garment patched too many times. And danger, yes, danger is constant. Not in the way of nightly gunfire or towering crime, but in the slow erosion of certainty, in the rumour of barbarian warbands crossing the Rhine, in the strange faces riding into town under imperial banners, speaking guttural dialects, demanding grain and loyalty. Rome's army is no longer Roman. It is German, Thracian, Pannonian. Their oaths are recent, their pay uncertain, their patience, thin and disease, how it creeps. In the warm, stagnant baths where men once debated philosophy, now lurk plagues unnamed. Fevers that return each summer, gut sickness that spreads in the markets. Hospitals, such as they are, resemble more a place to die than to heal. Surgeons lack anesthesia, understand little of the body's mysteries. A broken bone could mean death. A cough could mean a slow decline into oblivion. You might try to speak, but your words would falter. Latin is not dead yet, but it breathes heavily. Now, the elite speak in curls and formalities. The poor in chopped syllables and borrowed tongues. Your voice would sound alien, your gestures suspicious. A stranger in a land that remembers too much. At night, the city darkens. The oil lamps flicker low. The stars peer down upon rooftops, both grand and crumbled. In the distance, wolves howl, not just beasts, but men beyond the frontiers. The sack of Rome is not yet come, but it is dreamt of, feared. Whispers pass from tavern to villa, of Alaric, of betrayal, of legions that do not come home. You would lie down to sleep, perhaps in a small lodging, your skin crawling not with fear, but with lice, your ears full of the creaks of decaying timber and the scurrying of rats. And even then, even in slumber, you would feel it. The ancient weight of a world grown old. The slow, sad breath of Rome, not quite dead, but no longer truly alive. This was not the Rome of marble and triumphs. It was the Rome of shadows and survival. And this was only the first day. The sun rises slowly over Rome, warm but burdened, casting long shadows between columns that lean with age. The dawn bells ring from Christian basilicas, their echoes mingling with the chants of monks and the calls of street vendors opening their wares. But their words would not comfort you. Their meaning, even when spoken aloud, would feel like wind skimming the surface of a deep lake, recognizable in rhythm, alien in substance. This is no longer the empire of Latin's clarity and grandeur. What once tied Roman citizen to Roman citizen across provinces and seas is unraveling thread by thread. Language, the sinew of unity, is fraying in the corners of every forum and market. You step into the bustling crowd of a city square, perhaps the Forum Boreum, or the marketplaces near the Tiber, and you are struck first by the noise. Not the sheer volume, but the cacophony of tongues. Latin, yes, but not the Latin of your schoolbooks. This is vulgar Latin, worn and regionalized, bloated with slang and clumsy grammar, a living language limping toward its splintering future. You hear Greek, the tongue of the East, spoken fluidly by scholars and merchants, Syriac murmured by traders, from Antioch. Punic echoes still linger in certain neighborhoods, a fossil of Carthaginian descent. Gothic chants ripple from a group of federati soldiers, their speech rough as forest bark. And among them all, a blend, a stew of intonations, inflections and borrowed words. This is not babble by accident. It is the byproduct of an empire grown too vast, too old. You try to speak. Perhaps you utter a phrase, salve, amice, taught in classroom cadence. But the listener blinks at you, confused. You try again, more slowly. They smile politely, but move away. To them, your speech is quaint, too polished, perhaps even suspicious. The Latin they speak is truncated, bruised by necessity and invention. In Gaul, a peasant might call his neighbor frater, not in brotherhood, but simply in greeting. In Hispania, verbs twist into new endings. In Africa, even the vowels have softened. You are not understood. Not truly. You cannot buy bread without fumbling your silver, gesturing awkwardly, pointing. The vendor eyes you with the cool gaze of someone who sees a foreigner pretending to belong. Even the most basic phrases, a greeting, a farewell, a question, require patience and adaptation. What does that feel like? It feels like drowning in air, like hearing your name called from a distant shore and not knowing how to answer. You are not only linguistically lost, you are culturally unmoored. In this Rome, identity is regional, tribal, hybrid. Citizens still exist in name, but their loyalty may lie elsewhere. A man from the Danube identifies first as Illyrian, then, perhaps, Christian, then maybe Roman. Another from Egypt sees himself as Alexandrian before anything else. Romanitas, Romanness, is now a veil rather than a skin. It is worn when it suits, discarded when it does not. Walk through a school courtyard, and you might find boys chanting Virgil under the lash of a weary teacher, their verses garbled and half understood. Education is in decline, and fewer read the classics for truth. More do so to pass bureaucratic exams, to earn favor with some senator or bishop. The soul of Rome's letters flickers in and out. Even within churches, the tongues divide. A bishop preaches in Latin, yet half his flock speaks Gothic. Another delivers homilies in Greek, while the local garrison of soldiers listens with blank stares, unmoved by words they cannot follow. Prayers rise to heaven in a dozen different dialects. How could God understand what even men cannot? In law courts, the confusion is worse. Litigants must sometimes bring interpreters to explain contracts drafted in older tongues. Miscommunication is common. Justice, delayed or denied, is often a casualty of this linguistic labyrinth. One scribe writes in a script so archaic that his own colleagues cannot read it without pause. And what of signage? Official notices are still issued in Latin, but many are now glossed with Greek. In border regions, local tongues sneak into public decrees. The empire speaks with a dozen voices, none of them clear, all of them echoing off walls cracked with age. At the military barracks, you approach a young legionary. He wears the colours of Rome, but speaks in broken Latin laced with Gothic rhythm. He understands your question only partially. When you mention imperator, he frowns, not because the word is foreign, but because the title shifts too often. Worn by men he may never see, whose authority is measured in coin and charisma, not birthright. How would you give orders here? How would you plead for mercy or defend your innocence? Without the proper tongue, without the shared rhythm of understanding, you are a leaf in the storm of empire. Night falls again, and you dine among strangers who laugh at jokes you cannot grasp. Their laughter is not cruel, only distant. You smile in reply, a gesture of peace, of bridge building. But they see your confusion. They do not hate you, but they do not know you either. Even in sleep, you dream in a language that no longer fits. The Latin of Cicero and Caesar whispers from your lips in a world that has moved on. You awaken to chants in strange cadence, to sermons that you cannot follow, to laws that you cannot read. You, visitor from the future, are not Roman. Not anymore. You awaken beneath a roof that leaks, in a city that no longer knows how to dream. Outside, the day begins not with music, nor joy, but with the groaning machinery of survival. For you are in a Rome where the economy is not a source of vitality, but a labyrinth of demands, where the price of living is measured in sweat, fear, and the heavy coinage of submission. There is a word on everyone's lips, though few speak it joyfully, a nona. This was once the pride of the empire. Rome's promise to feed her people, to ensure grain flowed from the fertile provinces of Egypt and Africa, down the Tiber and into the mouths of her citizens. But now, the system strains beneath its own weight. Corruption seeps into the granaries. Supply chains are brittle, stretched across a world in decline. The bread is still given, yes, but it is coarse, rationed, and increasingly political. Miss a tax payment, your portion may be withheld. Displease the local administrator, suddenly, your name vanishes from the list of eligible recipients. You line up in the forum with hundreds of others, hoping your chit will be honored. Hoping. The grain has arrived. Hoping. And what of the taxes? You would not understand the weight of them, not truly. In your world, taxation is abstract, digital, spread across systems and institutions. Here it is immediate, intimate, and often brutal. Every man, woman, and child bears a burden calculated by quotas that neither mercy nor logic can penetrate. A widow may be forced to pay the dues of her dead husband. A field that fails to yield may still owe its share. The tax collectors do not accept excuses, only coin, or goods, or labour, or flesh. Imagine a knock at your door, not from a neighbour, but from a fiscal agent of the imperial bureaucracy. He arrives with a scroll, wax-sealed, his eyes dulled by routine. Behind him are guards. Your home is assessed, your pottery, your livestock, even the oil you keep for your lamps. You protest, perhaps, but your words falter. You owe what is written, Even if it crushes you, you are not alone in this. The entire empire groans beneath the pressure. Small farmers flee to the estates of the wealthy, seeking protection in exchange for servitude. These colonies, tied to the land, become the embryo of medieval serfdom. Cities shrink, villages disappear, the peasantry bends beneath invisible hands. And then there is the bureaucracy. The imperial office, so vast, so rigid, so deeply entwined with daily life. In every province, clerks copy scrolls, calculate levies, and draft decrees. They write in triplicate, bind documents with coloured thread, and preserve records in dusty vaults that no one ever truly reads again. The machine of governance is ponderous, but omnipresent. Try to open a shop, and you must petition the city council. Try to marry, and your lineage may be examined. Change residence, and new documentation must be submitted. Paperwork is your shadow, your jailer. Even your name is not wholly your own. It is recorded, filed, stored. Yet for all its structure, the system is far from fair. Influence speaks louder than legality. A bribe placed into the right hand can erase your debts. A friendship with a scribe can hide your household from the tax roll. A senator's nod can silence a magistrate. You, stranger from the future, would struggle with this world of parchment and power. There are no phones to call for help, no ombudsman, no helplines. Every decision, every form, every declaration must be made in person, often at great cost, sometimes with peril. And in this world of scarcity, coin itself is a language of anxiety. Currency has debased. Silver is rare. The solidus, the golden, coin introduced by Constantine still holds value, but it is hoarded, unreachable for most. Instead, you see a flood of bronze and copper, their inscriptions faded, their worth uncertain. Inflation haunts the streets. Prices rise unpredictably. A loaf of bread today may cost twice what it did last month. Sellers shrug. Buyers beg. Trade has slowed. Roads are no longer safe. Pirates stalk the Mediterranean, and barbarian incursions choke northern routes. The market stalls are fewer now, their goods simpler. You find dried figs, salted fish, old wine, cracked oil jars. Luxury has faded into legend. And yet, in the midst of this decline, the imperial court grows richer. The bureaucracy expands. Civil servants, eunuchs, and palace scribes flourish like ivy in shade. The emperor, wherever he sits, Milan, Ravenna, Constantinople, is surrounded by a forest of officials whose purpose is often to preserve their own station. You might wonder, how can a state so weak feel so oppressive? Because its weakness demands more from those who have least. It taxes the grain of the poor to pay the bribes of generals. It drains the life of villages to decorate the walls of imperial halls. Its decay is not collapse, but consumption of time, of dignity, of breath. You would not last a day here, not because you are soft, but because this world is too practiced in the art of squeezing. You would tire not from labour, but from navigating, a system built on tension and fear. At dusk, you sit beside a fountain, once a monument, now a watering hole for beggars. An old man beside you mumbles figures to himself, how many bushels owed, how many coppers saved, how many sons taken for conscription. His fingers count debts like rosary beads. His eyes do not meet yours. The empire, he says, is not dead. Not yet. But it is tired. And when an empire is tired, it dreams not of glory, but of ledgers. You walk home beneath a sky of dull stars, the taste of bitter grain still on your tongue. And you understand, if only for a moment, that survival in this Rome is not about strength, but about surrender. It begins perhaps with a cough, a simple one, dry, persistent. You think little of it at first. The dust in the streets, the smoke from too many hearths, the scent of spoiled meat lingering in the alleyways. You wave it off. But the cough deepens, It roots itself in your chest, makes your breath short, your steps slower. The air feels colder than it should. In your world, you would go to a doctor. You would be examined, tested, reassured. Here in the late Roman Empire, there are doctors too. But what they offer is something different. Not healing, but ritual. Not science, but tradition. Not certainty, but hope wrapped in ignorance. The first physician you find is a man in his 30s, wrapped in a tunic faded by years of ash and oil. His eyes are lined not from study, but from watching men die. He approaches you with a cautious gaze, his tools laid out beside him. A bronze scalpel dulled with use, glass jars of thick-smelling herbs, strips of linen browned from previous wounds. He listens to your breathing, taps your back. Then he mutters in Greek and shakes his head. He tells you your humors are unbalanced. The black bile is rising. Your blood is sluggish. He prescribes a regimen of boiled turnips, vinegar diluted in rainwater, and frequent vomiting. You follow his advice. What choice do you have? The days pass, and your body grows weaker. The cough burns now, clawing at your ribs. Fevers come in the night, strange dreams clinging to your mind like cobwebs. You shiver, though the day is warm. Your skin turns pale, your limbs sore, and still the doctor returns with leeches, with poultices, with prayers whispered to Asclepius. You begin to learn the true face of Roman medicine, not the scholarly diagrams or Greek treatises, but the practical, often desperate art of trying to keep men alive when the world itself seems intent on decay. There are healing temples, yes, where supplicants sleep on stone floors, hoping for dreams sent by the gods. There are bathhouses, where warm water and scraped skin are believed to cleanse sickness. But there is little understanding of contagion. The sick mingle freely with the well. Illness is seen as a divine punishment, or the result of sin, or the alignment of ill-fated stars. You learn quickly that surgery is a gamble, conducted without anesthesia, with blades rinsed in wine and hope. Amputations are done by strong hands and tight teeth. If you bleed too long, they cauterize the wound with fire. If you cry out, they say you are weak. The rich, of course, fare slightly better. They have access to private physicians, often trained in Alexandria or Pergamon, fluent in the texts of Galen and Hippocrates. Yet even they are bound by the limits of their time. Their remedies include crushed pearls, ox liver, honey mixed with goat dung. They prescribe rest, astrology, and the reading of sacred texts. But for most, for you, the sick room is a place of slow surrender. Beds are simple cots of straw. Linens are rarely clean. The smell is of sweat, rot, and despair. Children cry until they cannot. Mothers cradle sons who grow colder by the hour. The dying whisper to gods both new and old, hoping for something, relief perhaps, or simply an end. And then there is the plague. It does not have one name, but many. It comes in waves. Some call it the Antonine, some the Cyprian. Some speak of a later pestilence that stalks the cities in the 5th century. It brings pustules, blackened limbs, blindness, and sudden death. Whole households vanish. Priests refuse to bury the dead. Streets are lined with corpses wrapped in old tunics. Dogs scavenge. Flies feast. You see it in the distance. Hospices overwhelmed. Monks covering their mouths with cloth soaked in myrrh. The empire, already brittle, cracks under the weight of this invisible enemy. Soldiers desert. Cities seal their gates. Trade halts. Fear becomes the dominant language. And yet, some still believe they can treat it. They light sacred fires. They burn herbs in the streets. They chant verses. The church calls for fasting, for repentance, for divine mercy. And people listen, because they have nothing else. You try to stay clean. You boil your water. You avoid the sick. But the sickness is in the air, in the soil, in the breath of strangers. You cannot escape it. Eventually you feel the sharp pain in your joints, the thickening of your throat, the dizziness that grips you as you stand. You know then that it is your turn. No hospitals await you. No ambulance, no sterile room. Only the back room of a stranger's house, a damp cloth across your brow, and the prayer of a woman who barely knows your name. You slip into fever dreams, memories of a cleaner world, a gentler one. You recall warm beds and bottled pills, fluorescent lights, the gentle hum of machines that do not exist here. You long for them, but they do not answer. And then, perhaps, you recover, or perhaps you do not. But whether you live or die, the lesson is clear. The body, in this time, is not a sanctuary. It is a battleground, and the healers, noble though they may be, are ill-equipped for the war they fight. You would not last a day, not in sickness, not in pain, not when every breath is a question and every cure a myth. You find yourself walking through a narrow, shaded street just past dawn, your sandals brushing against dust and crumbled plaster. The city is slow to wake, and the smell of last night's fires clings to the air like smoke in a forgotten room. You round a corner and stop, frozen by the scene before you. A man, hooded and barefoot, his hands bound behind him, is being led by two lictors through the heart of Rome. One lictor carries the fasces, the symbol of Roman authority, a bundle of rods bound around an axe. No one intervenes, no one even stares for long. The march of justice is a familiar rhythm, now. The man's crime is unknown to you, but in this era, that hardly matters. His fate was likely decided in a hall you would never be allowed to enter, by men you would never meet, for reasons not wholly written in law. You think of justice as something slow, deliberate, and fair. You think of trials, of rights, of appeals and reason. But in Rome's final century, justice is swift, arcane, and often terrifying. Let us begin with the courts. To the eye, they seem noble. Marble porticos, judges in elaborate robes, scribes with swift hands. Legal Latin echoes in the chambers like a solemn chant. But beneath this surface lies a different world. A place where verdicts are often sold before arguments are heard. The wealthy have advocates, some skilled in rhetoric, others skilled in flattery and bribery. The poor have little more than hope and their own trembling voice. You, as an outsider, would not even know where to begin. The legal process is a forest of scrolls and ceremonies. Petitioning the court requires introductions, payments, documents written in formulaic script, often copied by hand at great expense. Miss a step, and your case is dismissed. Miss a word, and your intent is misread. Speak out of turn, and you are fined. And then there is the matter of status. Rome's laws do not treat all equally. A senator is judged differently than a plebeian. A Roman citizen may avoid torture in interrogation. A foreigner may not. Slaves are not allowed to testify unless under duress, meaning beaten, bloodied, coerced into confession. A noblewoman may receive a private hearing. A street vendor may be lashed in public for theft, whether proven or presumed. You walk through the city and see this divide carved into every wall. Graffiti speaks of betrayals and accusations. Notices on wooden boards warn of curfews, of new laws issued by distant governors. In some districts, the local curiales, municipal officers, collect fines so often they are feared more than thieves. You ask yourself, where is mercy? Where is compassion? There are judges who are honest. There are laws that seek fairness, but they are swimming upstream against a torrent of chaos and collapse. The empire is too vast, its limbs too numb. Governors rule their provinces like kings. Soldiers act as both protectors and executioners. A traveling magistrate may arrive one day with orders from the emperor himself and rewrite the law of your town by sunset. What of prisons? There are no rows of cells with bars and beds. Instead, there are holding pits, dark and airless. The Tullianum, Rome's oldest prison, is more tomb than jail, a place of waiting, not reform. Prisoners are not kept long, The state has no desire to feed or house them. You are judged, sentenced, and either fined, enslaved, exiled, or executed. And even exile is often a death sentence, especially for the poor. Punishments are theatrical. A thief may lose a hand. A traitor may be flayed or crucified, depending on his rank. Public floggings, forced labor, brandings, all meant not only to punish, but to remind the city what happens when order frays. You might witness a crowd gathered at the circus, not for a race, but for a sentencing. A man tied to a post, stripped of name and dignity. A herald reads his crimes aloud. The crowd murmurs. Some cheer, some avert their eyes. And you, unaccustomed to this, feel a cold crawl down your spine. Even guilt is fluid here. Accusations are powerful weapons. A whisper in the ear of a city official, a forged document, a planted item, all can send a man spiraling into ruin. Vengeance is legal if it wears the right mask. Power shields the accuser more than truth ever could shield the accused. And yet, amidst this brutality, there is an eerie normalcy. People live within this system because they must. They learn its rhythms. A merchant knows which tribune to bribe. A widow knows when to speak and when to stay silent. A scribe understands that writing the wrong name can cost a man his freedom and perhaps gain him favor. You try to navigate this world, but your instincts betray you. You speak too boldly. You question too much. You carry no official seal, no family name, no client network. The law sees you not as a citizen, but as a complication. And in Rome, complications are removed. 1. Evening, you are summoned. A dispute over a borrowed item, fabric perhaps, or a knife. The other party is known to the magistrate. You are not. You speak the truth, clearly, but your words are foreign, your manner strange. The magistrate frowns. The guards grip their spears. You are fined an impossible sum. When you cannot pay, they take your ring, then your shoes. Then they offer you work, labor for the city in lieu of payment. You decline. They do not ask again. You find yourself cleaning the edge of a cistern at dusk, your hands raw, your pride in tatters. You were not imprisoned. You were not beaten, but you are changed. In this Rome, justice is not blind. It watches, it remembers, and it rarely forgives. Part 6. Gods of the Gutter and the Throne. At dawn, the bells begin. Not the clear, measured tolls of a single belief, but a cacophony, clashing notes from churches, shrines, and private altars, each voice raised to a different heaven. You are not in a land of one God, nor even many gods. You are in a world of too many gods, too many saints, too many heresies and lingering ghosts. The empire's final century is one where faith spills over every boundary, where temples become churches, and statues are hidden rather than destroyed, and you, stranger from another age, would be swept away in this river of divine confusion. The old gods are fading. Jupiter no longer commands the skies. Mars no longer strides beside generals. Their temples, once the pride of every city, stand, hollowed. Some have been stripped for marble, others converted into sanctuaries for the Christian rites. And yet their presence lingers. A scratched graffito of Apollo in a villa wall. A worn coin bearing Minerva's gaze. The smell of old incense clinging to the stones of ruined sanctuaries. The empire has not fully let them go, not truly. But Christianity has risen, not gently, not peacefully, but in fire and rhetoric and blood. Since the days of Constantine and Theodosius, the cross has grown taller than any pillar of stone. Emperors now rule not as divi filii, sons of gods, but as servants of the Christian deity. Their portraits show them with halos. Their decrees invoke Christ and holy justice. You enter a basilica, long, echoing, lit by oil lamps and filled with chant. It is not yet the Gothic cathedrals you imagine, but something older. Men in rough woolen robes sing in Latin and Greek. A bishop stands at the altar, his voice sharp, his eyes afire with certainty. But even here, there is no unity. This is not a world of settled doctrine. The Nicene Creed has been declared, yes, but belief is fragmented. Arianism spreads like wildfire through the ranks of Gothic soldiers and distant provinces. Donatists rise in Africa. Nestorians debate in the East. Heresy is not a fringe, but a forest. And in that forest, faith is a weapon. Accusations of heresy are common and dangerous. A neighbor may whisper that your prayers are wrongly phrased, that you do not bow at the right moment, that you honor saints too fervently, or not enough. A bishop may be exiled for his theology, a congregation split by a single phrase. Was Christ created or co-eternal with the Father? The question has filled prisons, burned scrolls, and shaken thrones. You feel the weight of this tension when you walk the streets. A pagan amulet is clutched discreetly beneath a tunic. A woman leaves bread not only at a Christian altar, but also at a roadside stone long honored as a rural shrine. There is fear in the eyes of the devout, not only of damnation, but of denunciation. In certain districts, Christian mobs have defaced statues, smashed altars, burned libraries. Yet in others, pagan aristocrats still hold quiet feasts in honor of forgotten gods. The Vestal Virgins are gone, disbanded. But their temple still casts a shadow. And in that shadow, old rituals echo. At night, you pass a house where voices rise, in chant. The windows are shuttered, the cross outside blackened with smoke. This is a sect outside the church's favor, perhaps Montanists or Manichaeans, or some small mystic brotherhood tracing their beliefs to a vision seen in the desert. The empire is filled with them. They write their own gospels, live by their own rules. To the authorities, they are dangerous. To the fearful, they offer refuge. You speak to a young soldier, born to a Gothic father and Roman mother. He tells you he believes in Christ, but not like the city bishops. His Christ is strong, not meek. He wears no crown of thorns. He carries a sword. You nod, not sure what to say. Even the name of God means something different in every mouth. And what of the emperors? They too are now enmeshed in divine matters. They do not rule merely by birth, but by the will of heaven. Their laws quote scripture. Their coinage bears Christian symbols. Yet they are not saints. They exile bishops, appoint patriarchs, interfere in councils. They wield the church like a weapon, and the church in turn often bends the crown. This was not the empire of Augustus, nor of Marcus Aurelius. It is an empire of saints and schisms, of holy relics paraded in times of drought, of fasting armies praying for victory. You enter a town plagued by famine. The people do not pray to Ceres or Jupiter. They process through the streets barefoot, chanting psalms, carrying icons of the Virgin, begging the heavens for rain. They believe, fiercely, desperately, and you wonder, how much of that belief is choice, and how much is all that remains? And still, in a ruined villa outside the walls, you find an old man lighting a fire before a tiny statue of Mercury. He offers wine and murmurs in Latin, so ancient it sounds like song. You ask him why. Because he remembers me, he replies, his voice cracking. The new god does not answer. You leave him in silence. Faith here is not tranquil. It is a battlefield of minds and souls. The empire does not kneel as one. It kneels in 1,000 directions, with 1,000 prayers, each louder than the last. And in such a world, where truth itself is contested, you do not last. You hear the sound before you see it. Cheers, faint and scattered, like waves against a distant shore. You follow the noise through winding alleys, past shuttered shops and quiet cloisters, until you reach it. The remains of an amphitheatre. Not the Colosseum itself, but a smaller one. Cracked, slumped, worn like an old soldier's cloak. The seats are uneven, the banners faded, but there is still an audience. Still the promise of amusement. Yet when you sit, what you witness is not joy, but habit. The games, once Rome's proudest symbol of power and unity, have become a pale echo. The grand spectacles of emperors, mock naval battles, armies of gladiators, beasts from Africa and Asia are gone. The coffers are too empty. The emperors too distant. What remains are local affairs, clumsy brawls, aging athletes, and tired beasts that snarl more from hunger than rage. The crowd cheers, yes, but without the old spirit. They are here not to celebrate, but to forget. A brief release from ration lines, from tax scrolls, from fevered prayers. They laugh too loudly at mimes who stumble over words. They gasp at stunts they have seen too many times. This is not entertainment. It is escapism. A desperate reaching for something long past. You would expect theatre, perhaps. Elegant verse, sharp comedy, stirring drama. But the troops are fewer now, scattered across provinces, often ridiculed more than revered. Actors are not heroes. They are vagabonds. Their plays are shortened, their scripts slurred. The best writers have long since died, their lines forgotten in the dust of neglected libraries. In the countryside, festivals still bloom, but they are simpler, local, tinged with superstition. The Lupercalia and Saturnalia continue in shadows, wrapped now in Christian cloaks or rural secrecy. The dances are slower, the songs older than memory. You see children playing games carved from ancient rhyme, games their parents no longer understand. You walk the city and seek places of repose. The bathhouses, once vibrant centres of gossip and repose. They are still used, yes, but many are colder now, their water uneven, their floors cracked. The finest thermae have closed or been repurposed. One now houses a bishop's court, another lies in ruin. Home to birds and silence, you step into a functioning bath, and the warmth soothes your limbs, but the laughter is gone. The tiled murals are faded, and the conversations hushed. Men speak of taxes, of disease, of God and punishment, not of art or politics or love. You seek books, scrolls, codices, the wisdom of Rome's finest minds. But the libraries are shuttered, the scribes overworked. Many volumes have been burned by zealots or stolen by invaders. The works of Livy, of Plautus, of Seneca, moulder behind, locked doors or rest forgotten in eastern cities. You try to discuss poetry with a merchant. He frowns. Can poetry feed a child? He asks. Once, Rome was the centre of philosophy. Men argued beneath columns, challenged emperors with logic, charted the stars with care. But now, the philosophers have either fled to safer courts, Alexandria, Constantinople, or taken vows of silence and prayer. To speak too freely risks heresy. To think too boldly risks suspicion. There is music still, but it is simple. Flutes, harps, the soft thrum of lyres. You hear it drifting from open windows, not in concert halls, but in kitchens and temples. Melancholy melodies, songs to soothe infants or mourn the dead. Rarely does it rise in celebration. Even food, once the joy of Roman feasts, has become necessity. You eat bread and olives, salted fish, the occasional egg. Wine is thin. Fruit is rare. The great banquets of old, where dishes changed with each hour and poetry accompanied every toast, are spoken of like fables. You meet an old cook who once served in a senator's household. He smiles as he tells you of stuffed dormice and flaming peacocks. But when you ask if he still cooks, he shakes his head. No one pays for pleasure now. You begin to understand. Rome has not forgotten how to laugh. It has merely forgotten why. This is a world so consumed by survival that leisure feels like betrayal. To sing too loudly, to smile too brightly, to waste time on dance or verse, is to risk being seen as foolish or worse, ungrateful. The gods are watching. The empire is watching. And both seem to be in mourning. One evening, you stumble upon a group of children playing in the dirt with stones. They are reenacting a battle, pretending to be Romans and Goths, shouting names. they barely comprehend. You watch as one child stands tall and declares, "I am Alaric." The others cheer, then collapse in pretend death. It is play, yes, but not of pride. Their heroes are now invaders, their history inverted. You realize, with quiet sorrow, that even play is a reflection of power. When Rome forgot to laugh, it was not by choice. It was a consequence, a symptom of an empire that had grown too heavy, too weary to carry the burden of joy. You return to your lodging that night, the sound of distant cheering still in your ears. You close your eyes and try to remember what laughter once sounded like, when it was born of plenty, not scarcity. And you understand, this Rome no longer celebrates life, it endures it. In earlier centuries, the sound of a Roman soldier's march could make provinces tremble. The thunder of disciplined feet, the glint of sunlight upon bronze and iron, the firm eyes of men bred not merely for war, but for empire. The Roman legionary was not just a fighter, he was an icon, a symbol of civilization clad in mail and laurel. But that time has faded like worn frescoes on the walls of forgotten villas. Now, in Rome's final century, the soldier still marches, but the sound is hollow, the rhythm uncertain, and the laurel, once polished with pride, is crumbling into ash. You stand on a road leading out of a provincial town, dusty, unguarded, curved with age. Ahead, a unit of soldiers returns from a patrol. Their numbers are thin, their faces vacant, their armor mismatched. One wears a dented helmet from Thrace, another a tunic patched so many times its color can no longer be named. Their shields are chipped, their swords dulled, not just from battle, but from years without proper forge or care. These are Rome's defenders, or what remains of them. You greet them as one might, cautiously, with respect. One soldier, a man in his 30s with a deep scar trailing from brow to jaw, responds in fractured Latin. He is not Roman by birth. None of them are. The names of Legio X and Legio II no longer echo with native voices. The legions are now filled with federati, tribes once beyond the frontier, now paid to guard the very empire they once defied. Goths, Alans, Huns, Vandals. They speak in tongues not found in Virgil's verses, their loyalty earned not by oaths to the Senate and people of Rome, but by promises of gold, land, or refuge. Some serve well, others bide their time. Gone are the camps of strict formation and daily drill. The great castra, military bases that once pulsed like hearts across the empire, are neglected, overgrown, or repurposed as marketplaces and grain stores. The discipline of old Rome has faded into the murk of necessity. Pay is irregular. Rations are thin. Morale is a candle flickering in wind. A young recruit tells you his brother deserted last year, not out of cowardice, but because their unit had not been paid in 6 months. They had fought off a band of raiders from the Rhine, only to be given a loaf of stale bread and a dead mule for their trouble. He left for the mountains, the recruit says. Said he'd rather be hunted by wolves than forgotten by Rome. You ask about command. They laugh, not cruelly, but with the shared pain of men who no longer believe in the structure they serve. Officers are now often political appointments, sons of senators, cousins of bishops, men with titles and silks, but little field experience. Decisions come slowly, or not at all. Orders contradict themselves. And the higher you climb the chain, the less you find a sword, and the more you find a scroll. In battle, these flaws cost lives. Skirmishes break out more often now, against rebels, tribes, even rival Roman factions. And when they fight, the soldiers do so with more desperation than honor. There are no triumphal parades for victories in this century. No gold wreaths, no eternal fame carved into marble. If you survive, you march again. If you fall, your body is buried in a shallow grave, or not at all. You ask a veteran what keeps him fighting. His eyes darken. It's not for Rome, he says. Rome doesn't see us anymore. He points to the insignia on his shield, barely visible beneath grime. It's for the men beside me, that's all. Once, the military was the backbone of Roman identity. Veterans were granted land, honored in their towns, praised by poets. Now they return home to silence or suspicion. Some are refused entry. Others find their farms seized during their absence. You watch a soldier hand over his last coin to a farmer for a bowl of gruel. The farmer nods, but makes no mention of thanks. Soldiers bring trouble. That is the reputation now. And yet, they are still needed, because the empire cannot function without them. The borders are porous, the interior rife with unrest. Governors write letters begging for reinforcements that never come. Cities promise extra grain if a unit will station nearby. In absence of law, soldiers are the only deterrent against chaos. But what happens when the soldiers themselves are no longer deterrents, but dangers? In some towns, unpaid units have seized markets. In others, they have made their own laws. A century ago, this would have been treason. Now, it is survival. And still, Rome speaks of its army with grandeur. On frescoes, they still paint Mars, stern and invincible. In senatorial halls, decrees still begin with praises to the brave men in arms. But these are words written by men who have not held a spear in decades. Men who fear the soldiers more than they trust them. At dusk, you watch them. Light a small fire by the road. One plays a wooden flute. Another sharpens his blade. They eat slowly, eyes scanning the darkened tree line. No songs of victory are sung. No prayers to Mars offered. Instead, a soft chant rises. Foreign, rhythmic, old. A Gothic hymn to ancestors, perhaps. It is low and filled with yearning, not for glory but for home. You sit quietly, knowing you do not belong. This is a brotherhood forged not by empire, but by endurance. Rome's sword has rusted, yet still it swings. Not by strength, not by honor, but by sheer need. And that, perhaps, is the saddest part. You would not last among them. Not because you lack bravery, but because they no longer fight for anything you would recognize. Not for Rome, not for victory, but simply because they must. You hold a map of the empire in your hands. It is worn, marked in faded ink, its borders drawn with the confidence of another age. The Mediterranean gleams at the center, surrounded by cities whose names were once uttered with awe. Londinium, Carthago, Lugdunum, Augusta Treverorum, Mediolanum. Rome sits at the center like a heart once mighty, now trembling. But as you trace the lines with your fingers, you feel it, the fracture. This map lies. It pretends unity where none remains. It shows a Rome that governs, protects, unites. But walk the roads, speak to the guards, peer into the streets, and you will see the truth. The empire is no longer whole. It is a quilt frayed at every edge, each patch stitched to a different rhythm. Where does Rome end? It is no longer clear. In the north, Gaul has become a mosaic of warlords. Roman generals turn tyrants' state claims, rule in the name of emperors. They barely obey. Some mint their own coins. Others form pacts with barbarian chieftains, alliances born not of diplomacy, but of necessity. When Gothic bands ride through the countryside, it is these local rulers who parley, not envoys from Ravenna or Milan. And in Britannia, Rome's voice has long since faded. The legions are gone, recalled to defend the continent, never to return. The Roman villas rot beneath English reign. Saxon raiders drift along the coast like sharks, and the native Britons, once Romanized, turn back to their old gods, their own kings. The stones of Hadrian's Wall still stand, but only as silent witnesses to abandonment. Africa, once Rome's granary, has grown resentful. Berber tribes skirmish constantly along the southern frontier. Donatist Christians, branded heretics by the Western bishops, fill the cities with their own bishops, their own rituals. The governor in Carthage listens more to local councils than to imperial decrees. The roads still function, the trade ships still dock, but the pulse of Rome has weakened, replaced by regional thrum. Even in Italy, the supposed core, the cracks yawn wide. You arrive in a small town in the Apennines. The locals call themselves Roman, but their loyalties lie with the nearby bishop, not the distant emperor. Taxes are collected, yes, but not all reach the capital. Roads are maintained only where needed for church processions. Imperial administrators are greeted with suspicion. When you ask about Ravenna, the imperial seat, they shrug. It is not our Rome, one mutters. You press farther east. In Illyricum, once a proud recruiting ground for Rome's finest generals, the cities have grown quiet. Invasions have passed like storms. The survivors speak of emperors who rose and fell within weeks. The land is rich, but too dangerous. Only those backed by strong walls and stronger militias survive. And beyond the Danube and Rhine, the world changes entirely. Once these rivers marked the edge of civilization. Roman forts stood proudly along their banks, eyes turned toward the forests. Now those forests have moved inward. The limes, the frontier, has been breached so often that it exists only in memory. Entire tribes have crossed, not as invaders, but as settlers, guests, or threats. Some were invited by desperate emperors, offered land in exchange for service. Others came unbidden. They live in Roman towns. They plant Roman fields. But they speak Gothic, Vandalic, Frankish. They follow their own leaders, wear their own dress, bury their dead with their own rites. They call themselves foederati, but their allegiance is thin. In many regions, they outnumber the Roman population. And when tensions rise, they do not hesitate to remind the empire of its weakness. You meet a merchant returning from Aquitania. He speaks of a chieftain named Crocus, once a Roman ally, now the de facto ruler of half a province. He calls himself a consul, the merchant says, lips curled in scorn. He cannot read Latin. Yet none oppose him. His warriors are strong, his taxes lighter, his justice swift. And the emperors, their names change quickly. Honorius, Constantius, Valentinian, Avitus, Petronius Maximus. They rise and fall, crowned by generals or clergymen, murdered by rivals, or swallowed by irrelevance. In Constantinople, the Eastern emperors still claim supremacy, but their words carry little weight west of Thessalonica. Once, the emperor's image was sacred, etched on coin, sculpted in stone. Now, in many towns, people cannot name the man who rules them. In others, they scoff at the idea that a single figure can hold such a title. A farmer in Gaul shrugs when asked. "The emperor does not plough my field," he says. "My lord does." You begin to understand. Rome no longer governs. It suggests, and suggestion is not enough. The empire still sends envoys, still stamps its insignia, still maintains courts and taxes, but it is a performance, a memory. In many places, true power lies with bishops, with landlords, with warrior chieftains, whose loyalty is rented by grain and coin. The Senate still exists in Rome, but it is ceremonial, its debates echoing in half-empty chambers. Even the laws have grown regional. Some towns follow imperial code, others defer to church decrees. Still others invent their own rules, enforced by local militias. Justice, like borders, has become negotiable. You unfold your map again and stare at its lines. They blur beneath your gaze. Where does Rome end? Where the soldiers no longer march with purpose? Where the tax collectors stop coming? Where the people stop calling themselves Roman? Where fear replaces order? And these places grow in number every season. Rome is not yet dead, but her body is breaking, her limbs twitch, her breath shallow. Her voice, once thunderous, now whispers across fragmented provinces, begging to be remembered. You would not last in this world, not because it is cruel, but because it is unmoored. A realm without center, a map without meaning. In this late age, to survive, is to forget what Rome was. To endure is to accept that no one truly rules anymore. The name Rome still holds power. It echoes like a prayer, soft but persistent, drifting from the lips of old men, etched on coins that pass hand to hand with dwindling value, spoken by emperors whose thrones rest on crumbling marble. But the name has outlived its meaning. You stand in a crowded forum, no longer the bustling center of empire, but a place where chickens peck between the cracks of worn flagstones, and old women sell herbs beside graffiti-covered pillars. A speaker stands atop a crate, his voice scratchy, crying aloud, "I am Roman. I serve Rome." The crowd stares blankly. A child giggles. The words mean little now, because Rome is not one place anymore. It is many places, and it is no place at all. The men who still claim the title of Roman citizen do so out of habit, not faith. The senators wear their white togas with dignity, but the cloth is coarser, the embroidery faded. Their houses, once filled with marble and scrolls, now creak with damp and memory. Their voices still carry the cadence of Cicero's descendants, but the Senate itself is powerless, its decrees mere echoes of an age that no longer listens. Once, names had meaning in this land. A name carried a lineage, a history, a promise, to be a Julius, a Claudius, a Flavius. These were badges of glory, signs of connection to emperors, conquerors, the eternal line of Rome's stewards. But now, those names pass from mouth to mouth, like costumes. Men take them to lend themselves weight. Some are born with them and feel them as chains. To be called Julius now is to be haunted by what one is not. You meet a boy named Augustus. He delivers messages for a baker and sleeps behind the oven. His father named him so for luck. The boy shrugs when asked. "I am not an emperor," he says, teeth flashing with irony. "I am only cold at night." Titles remain too. Prefectus, consul, pontifex, imperator. They are recited in public ceremonies, carved on sarcophagi, attached to signatures with a tired flourish. But most of the authority they once carried has hollowed. The praefectus urbi commands a fraction of what he once did. The consul is a ceremonial honor granted more from nostalgia than need. Even the title of emperor, Imperator Augustus, has become a revolving door of names and faces, men who rule for months, sometimes weeks, before being replaced or forgotten. You read the proclamations nailed to temple walls. They begin, always, in grand tradition, by decree of the divine emperor, guardian of the eternal city, son of victory. Yet the paper is torn, the ink smudged, the locals barely glance. A farmer walks past and mutters, "Which emperor?" No one answers. Even the name Rome itself is stretched thin. It once meant power, law, light. It was the axis of the world. But now Constantinople calls itself the New Rome. So does Ravenna in whispers. In Gaul, certain generals claim to preserve Romanitas, Romanness, within their own fiefdoms. Each calls itself the true heir. Each accuses the others of falling. In truth, they all carry pieces, but none carry the whole, and it is exhausting. You speak to an elderly magistrate, once posted in Carthage, now retired to a villa overlooking a broken aqueduct. He pours you wine and says, "When I was young, I believed we were still Rome, that we could preserve it, but now," he lifts his cup and gestures to the cracked ceiling. "We preserve names, not things, not spirit, just the sound of what we once were." In many towns, the pressure to seem Roman is overwhelming. Statues are cleaned, even if the gods they depict are forbidden. Latin is taught, even though few speak it well. Men wear senatorial brooches to market, quoting Virgil as they haggle for fish. But it is theatre, desperate theatre. And what of the young? The children born in this century do not dream of Senate benches or triumphal arches. They dream of safety, of fields not trampled by soldiers, of nights without fire on the horizon. A boy in northern Italia tells you he wants to be a monk, not a general. Books last longer than spears, he says, and perhaps he is right. The schools still teach Roman history, but it feels more like legend than curriculum. Romulus, Remus, the Seven Hills, Scipio, Caesar, Augustus. The children repeat the tales with wide eyes, not reverence. These are stories, distant and golden, as far from their lives as the stars. You visit a crumbling library, half its scrolls, lost to damp, the rest barely legible. A scribe dusts off a fragment of Livy and sighs. We copy and recopy these works, he says, because they remind us that we were once great. But his voice falters on the word. Now, even memory is work. And it is, because legacy is no longer a light to guide. It is a weight to bear. To call oneself Roman now is to carry a burden of decline. It is to live beneath the shadow of marble colossi, to walk roads built by men far nobler, to speak a language that once ruled the world and now begs to be heard. It is to smile through ruin, to dress in dignity while the walls crumble behind you, and in that burden you would collapse. Because you have known a world where names change with time, where reinvention is power, not betrayal. But here, change is feared. The past is clutched like an heirloom, even as it cuts the hands that hold it. Rome is dying not only in stone and sword, but in soul. Her people wear her name like a tattered cloak, beautiful once, but threadbare now. It still warms them, but it no longer shields them. You would not last, not because the world is cruel, but because the name itself demands too much. The first thing you notice is the silence, not of peace, but of emptiness. It clings to the villages like early frost. It follows the plough like a ghost. This is not the silence of rested fields or sleeping flocks, but the hush of absence, of things that should be and are no longer. In Rome's final century, hunger is not a distant misfortune. It is a neighbor, a master, a shadow behind every closed door. You walk through a farming settlement on the outskirts of Etruria. The fields stretch toward the grey horizon, but their rows are crooked, their soil broken. No oxen plod these furrows. Those beasts have been sold, slaughtered, or lost. A boy drags a wooden plough himself, ribs sharp beneath his tunic, lips cracked with cold. There was a time when Rome fed the world, grain from Egypt, olives from Hispania, wine from Gaul. The Annona, the great system of provisioning, turned harvest into empire. Ships filled with wheat once lined the ports at Ostia. Bread flowed from the bakeries like water. But now the system buckles. Egypt's grain fleets are slowed by political chaos. Africa's harvests are raided by Berber tribes. The roads are no longer safe. Pirates control sections of the sea. And the great estates, those vast latifundia that once kept the granaries full, are divided, overworked, or abandoned entirely. Climate has shifted, subtly but cruelly. Rains fall late, winters lengthen, summers scorch, crops fail not only from neglect, but from a sky that no longer listens. The peasantry suffers first. You meet a woman named Livia. She is wrapped in 3 layers of worn linen, her eyes like bruises in a pale face. Her husband was conscripted 2 years ago. Her youngest daughter died of flux last spring. Now she barters onions and goat milk in the village square, hoping to trade for a little millet. "We had bread last week," she says quietly. "The good kind, crusted, warm. My son cried while eating it." The wealthy still eat, of course. Their tables are narrower, their courses fewer, but there is still oil, salted pork, dried apricots from distant lands. But even they feel it. Prices shift daily. Coin holds less power than grain. Guests talk more about crops than poetry. A senator's daughter tells you that her father now invests in granaries rather than villas. A warehouse of wheat, she says. is safer than 1,000 soldiers. Famine does not arrive all at once. It creeps. First, the loaves shrink. Then the lines grow longer. Markets become tense, desperate. Bakers lock their doors. The city guards are posted at stalls to prevent riots. When the grain ships are late, whispers rise. Has the emperor forgotten us? Has the bishop cursed us? Have we sinned too greatly? When the bread runs out, everything changes. You visit a town under ration. There are no markets anymore. The state has seized the grain, what little remains, and distributes it in measured handfuls. Families wait in lines, tokens in hand. The strong push forward. The weak are trampled. You see a man struck by a guard for stealing a second portion. He bleeds from the mouth. No one helps him. Even religion bows to hunger. In a countryside monastery, the monks plant every inch of ground they can find. Their prayers are not for salvation, but for cabbages to take root. They fast not from piety, but from necessity. A novice shows you their storage cellar. It is empty save for 6 turnips and a jar of honey. We are blessed, he whispers, for we still have salt. Charity becomes a burden. In cities, bishops are overwhelmed by the starving. Churches fill with beggars. The cloisters stink of unwashed flesh. Alms are given sparingly. Even the sermons grow sharper, blaming sin, foreign invaders, pagan sorcery. Hunger makes faith hard, and when the desperation becomes too much, morals fracture. You hear stories, some true, some whispered behind cupped hands, of children sold to landlords in exchange for sacks of barley, of families who boil the leather from shoes, of dogs hunted not for fear but for meat, of grave robbers who steal from the newly buried, not for gold, but for bones to grind into broth. In the mountains there are darker rumors, cannibalism, rituals, the old gods of earth and rot rising again beneath silent stones. You sit by a fire with a soldier on leave. He is hollow-eyed, his armor loosened. He tells you he once guarded a granary in southern Gaul. When it was overrun, the mob did not just take the wheat. They killed every man inside, not out of malice, but because they had nothing left. We called them citizens, he says, but that night, they were wolves. In cities, bakeries become fortresses. Famine laws are passed. Hoarding is punished by seizure. Some officials hoard anyway. Corruption deepens. A magistrate is caught storing 3 years' worth of barley beneath his villa. The crowd drags him into the street. The city has no more need for trials. You ask yourself, how does a world so proud grow so hungry? The answer lies not in one cause, but in many. Empires overreach, administrative decay, weather, war, invasion, but more than anything, in forgetting how fragile plenty truly is. And the hunger is not only of the body, it gnaws at the mind, makes people cruel, makes them quiet. Children born in this time do not laugh as often. Their games are slower, their songs shorter. They do not dream of gold or laurels, but of meat, of fruit, of warm soup. When they draw, they do not sketch gods or temples, but loaves, apples, steaming bowls. You feel it too. Though your purse carries silver, there is little to buy. You eat what the villagers eat. Gruel, a few wilted greens, the occasional fig, if luck smiles. Your strength fades, your thoughts turn strange. You begin to understand what it means when the belly is empty and the cupboard colder than the wind. Rome is still an empire, but one that cannot feed its own shadow. And in this world, you would not last. Not because you are soft, but because you have tasted certainty, and certainty has no place here. Here, every seed is a prayer, every crumb, a treasure, every winter, a test of will. The road to the villa winds through hills lined with stunted olive trees, their roots clutching soil grown thin and tired. Cypress trees lean in the wind like weary sentries, and dry grasses whisper against the hem of your tunic as you walk. This is not the countryside of Virgil's shepherds or Horace's sunlit musings. It is quieter now. more watchful. And then, over a low ridge, you see it. The villa. Once it would have gleamed in the sun, its columns white as bone, its gardens trimmed and humming with bees, its roof tiled in symmetry, as precise as a poem. Now the structure stands weathered and hunched, like a nobleman grown old, but still trying to stand tall. A servant opens the gate, an older man, barefoot, his tunic patched at the shoulder. He bows, but not deeply. In this time, even servitude is weary. You are shown through the atrium, where the marble once shone under water-fed channels. The pool is dry now, cracked. A few leaves rest at the bottom, unmoving. You hear no laughter, no music. This is the Roman household in its dusk, its heart still warm, but flickering. The domina, the mistress of the house, meets you in the peristyle. Her robes are clean, but plain. The jewels at her throat are old. Heirlooms, not luxuries. Her eyes are bright, but her speech careful, reserved. She offers you watered wine and stale honeyed bread. Her two sons, boys of 11 and 13, sit beside her in silence, watching you with curiosity and something else, restraint perhaps. They have already learned not to speak unless asked. The villa once employed 20 servants. Now there are 5. The cook is gone, replaced by the steward's wife. The tutor left last winter when payments ceased. The gardener tends what he can, but the grapevines grow wild across the southern wall, and the fountains have been still for years. Yet even in its slow unraveling, the household clings to its forms. The walls are lined with fading frescoes, Dionysus and Ariadne still dancing in the corners of peeling paint. The mosaic floors tell stories of old myths, though the tesserae are missing in patches, leaving broken gods underfoot. The study holds scrolls, carefully stacked, some untouched since the previous generation. The air smells of lavender and old parchment. You dine with the family at dusk. The table is set as tradition demands: silver cups, earthenware bowls, flatbread, olives, lentils, and a single roasted hen, offered in silence and shared with measured dignity. Grace is said, invoking both Christ and the household's ancestral spirits, an odd blending, but not uncommon now. Faith has grown layered, like dust over stone. They speak of the past, gently. The domina's father served as a consul in Africa. Her uncle once governed Narbonensis. There are portraits in the hallway, stern-faced men with high brows and iron eyes. But none of those men live now. Their names are remembered, but their deeds are distant, like the voices of ancestors heard. Through closed doors, you ask about the future, and the domina smiles faintly. We tend what we can, she says. We hold the rites. We light the lamps. We teach the boys to read and to speak with honor. Rome may fall, but the house will stand as long as we are here. It is a noble thought, a fragile hope. But you see the cracks. The storeroom is nearly empty. The wine jars are half full with last year's pressing. Rats have found their way into the grain bin. The steward is old, and his son has left to join a bishop's retinue in the city, where he might find steadier pay. In the boys' chamber, the walls are bare save for one wax tablet carved with Latin verbs. There are no tutors now, no Greek poetry recitations, no drills in oratory. Their mother teaches them by candlelight. They learn slowly, as much by memory as by meaning. At night, the family gathers by the hearth. The fire crackles in a brazier, and shadows dance across the plastered walls. The domina reads aloud from a tattered volume of Ovid. The boys lean close. The servant dozes nearby, curled beside the embers. It is warm here, almost peaceful. But outside, the wind rises. Dogs bark in the distance. A patrol of soldiers passes by the outer wall. Gothic federati in Roman armor speaking in harsh syllables. The villa's steward bolts the gate. The lamps are dimmed. The night is no longer trusted. You lie in a guest chamber beneath a thin wool blanket. Through the cracks in the shutter, you see the stars, cold, bright and unmoved. The silence returns, thick as wool, and as you drift to sleep, you feel the weight of something slipping. Not just a house, or a class, or a century, but a way of life. The Roman villa, once the anchor of Latin culture, the school of honor, the cradle of wealth and learning, is dying not in fire or conquest, but in quiet, in empty rooms and patched cloaks, in half-lit prayers and fading names, and in this soft decay you would not last. Not because the house is cruel, but because it remembers too much. And the memory burns. At first glance, they seem like any children, barefoot, laughing, chasing each other through alleyways and across sun-scorched fields. Their voices ring like bells in the silence of worn streets. But when you listen more closely, when you walk, among them you hear something different, a softness, a caution, a quiet that should not belong to youth. These are the children of Rome's final century, born not into empire, but into aftermath, into a world where the echoes of greatness still ring, but the source has long since faded. You follow a group of boys playing near the walls of an old basilica. They toss pebbles at a cracked statue of Mercury, laughing as each stone chips another flake from the god's forgotten face. They don't know his name. To them, he is just a stone man with wings. One calls him the Bird Man. Another says he's a devil. They do not worship. They do not fear. They simply play. But they play with old things. Shards of amphorae, discarded sandals, bent nails. Their toys are fragments, relics of a vanished age. No polished wood, no carved dolls from craftsmen's shops. A girl ties a string to a dry fig and drags it like a pet. Another girl scolds her in a mix of Latin and the rough dialect of the hills. They giggle, then fall silent as a patrol passes nearby. Children here are quiet around men with swords. Education, if it comes at all, is sporadic. In some towns, priests still gather a few children beneath the shade of ruined porticos, teaching them to trace Latin letters with sticks in the dirt. In others, retired scribes offer lessons in exchange for bread. But many learn nothing of grammar or rhetoric. Their language is the street. Their logic is survival. Their arithmetic is how many coins they must earn to avoid the lash. You meet a boy named Marcus, perhaps 10 years old, though his frame is thin and his face sharp with hunger. He shines boots in the forum. When asked about Virgil, he frowns. "Is that a merchant?" he asks. You shake your head and he shrugs. "I don't read. I run fast. That's enough." He smiles then, but the smile does not reach his eyes. His sister, Lucilla, is 7. She carries water for a seamstress in exchange for scraps of fabric. At night, she weaves them into small wraps for street vendors' feet. She does not play. There is no time, she tells you. Mama says play is for rich girls and ghosts. And yet, they are not unloved. Families still cling together in the twilight. Mothers teach lullabies passed down from a Rome that once ruled the world. Fathers, when present, tell stories of Mars and Minerva, now mixed with saints and angels. A grandfather carves small animals from olive wood and tells his grandchildren that they will guard the house if placed near the hearth. These are rituals, half remembered, half invented, but they bind the generations like fading ink on vellum. You witness a birthday feast, a boy of 12, celebrated with a loaf of bread, a single candle made from hardened wax, and a plum split 3 ways. He is delighted. His mother weeps in quiet pride. The neighbors bring songs. There is laughter, but beneath it, you feel it again. That ache of gratitude too sharp for joy. Because to grow up now is to grow in the shadow of loss. Children are born beside ruins and raised beside graves. They see mosaics not in palaces, but beneath their feet, in broken streets. They know the names of bishops better than those of emperors. Their games reenact not triumphs, but raids. One child plays the barbarian, the other the frightened citizen. "I'll burn your house," one cries. "Not if I run to the priest," the other shouts. This is history lived as trauma turned into play. The temples stand empty, the forums no longer bustle with debate, and the libraries, if they still exist, are locked. The children do not dream of becoming orators or generals. They want to be soldiers, for the bread, monks, for the safety, scribes, for the warm cloisters. Their imaginations, once meant to soar, now crawl along the narrow walls of survival. You ask a girl what she wants to be. She looks at you with large, serious eyes. Alive. That is the dream now, and yet, in their simplicity, there is a strange beauty, a resilience born of ruins. These children do not expect the world to give, but still, they hope, they smile, they make games from dust, they sing rhymes in fractured Latin, they light candles and whisper wishes to gods they do not name. In the cold months, they huddle in corners of broken houses, wrapped in patched cloaks. In spring, they gather wildflowers and press them into cracks in old statues. Not out of worship, but because it feels right. They are the final children of Rome, not in chronology perhaps, but in soul. When they grow, they will become something else, something new, something not quite Roman, not yet medieval. They will forget the taste of Latin verse. They will lose the names of old philosophers. They will learn to till rougher soil, to barter in harsher tongues, to kneel at different altars. You who were born into structure and comfort, into a world where childhood is protected, curated, expected, you would not last here. Not because you are unkind, but because you were never meant to grow beneath crumbling columns, where stories end too early and hope is learned in whispers. They are children of twilight, and twilight is not cruel, only dim, only quiet, only short. The bells toll again at dawn, not the confident clang of empire at prayer, but a dull, mournful sound that drifts through the mist like smoke from a dying fire. You follow it into the heart of the city, where the stone walls of the basilica rise like bones from the earth. The doors are open. Inside, the faithful kneel, and it is quiet. So terribly quiet. This is not the faith of triumph, of gilded icons and imperial decrees. This is the faith of survival, of hope strained thin, of tears carved into cheeks like ancient riverbeds. Rome in its final century does not pray with grandeur, but with desperation. The bishops say the end is near. The prophets agree. Signs, they whisper, are everywhere. Floods in Africa, snowfall in Sicily, an eclipse during Mass. The stars, they say, do not move as they should. You sit among the worshippers and watch as the priest lifts the host. His robe is patched, his eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. He speaks Latin mixed with Greek, his voice trembling not with age, but with burden. The congregation bows, crosses themselves, whispers hymns taught by mothers long buried. This is Christianity, but not the orderly faith of cathedrals and creeds. It is tangled, regional, flickering with variations and vehemence. In one church, Christ is the suffering lamb. In another, he is the avenger on a white horse. Heresies bloom like mold in old parchment. Donatists in North Africa, Arians among the Gothic ranks, Pelagians arguing in dusty halls about grace and free will. You try to keep up, but the theology moves like shifting sand. The old gods are gone, or at least driven underground. Jupiter's temples stand like hollow skulls. Vesta's flame, once tended without interruption for 1,000 years, is cold. But among the stones, you see remnants. A carved offering bowl tucked behind a Christian shrine. A farmer whispering to his olive trees with words older than Latin. Paganism is no longer public, but it is not dead. In the countryside, women tie woolen threads to thorn trees, asking for fertility. Men pour wine onto the earth before planting. Children wear charms shaped like crescent moons to ward off the evil eye. And when a storm crashes over a village, more than one man mutters too, the sky in the names of gods he dare not speak aloud. Faith here is not only ritual, it is armor. The world is unraveling, and people cling to the divine, not as celebration, but as lifeline. You pass a house where an old woman reads aloud from the Apocalypse of Peter. Her neighbors gather, eyes wide, listening as she describes fire from the heavens, seas boiling, cities swallowed by flame. They nod. They have seen the world burn already. In the alleys, men covered in sackcloth cry repentance. Children follow them, chanting verses from half-remembered psalms. You ask one man why he walks barefoot on broken stones. To show the earth my pain, he replies. So, God may spare it. Even those who do not attend church believe. Or rather, they fear. Comets are signs. Disease is punishment. War is divine wrath. Every misfortune becomes a message. A child's death is not mere tragedy. It is prophecy. A town's famine is not merely political. It is proof of sin. You meet a merchant who lost his livelihood to pirates. He now lives beside a church, feeding pigeons and whispering prayers for the emperor, though he does not remember the emperor's name. It is not for him, he says. It is for the world. If we stop praying, the sun may not rise, and there are visions, oh, how they spread in this twilight world. Every month, someone claims to see an angel, or a beast with 7 heads, or a woman clothed in stars weeping over Rome. Letters pass between towns, carrying stories of miracles and omens. Some are written by monks, others are etched into doorways, in charcoal. A blind boy in Ravenna recites verses never taught. A corpse in Gaul refuses to rot. A sheep is born with 2 faces in Pannonia. Each tale adds to the fire. Each flame flickers in the eyes of the fearful. Monasteries grow, small stone places where men and women retreat from the world, seeking order, silence, repetition. Here, the rules are strict. Bread at dawn, prayer at noon, sleep in shared cells. You visit one and are struck by the stillness. A young monk tells you, "We cannot save the empire, but we can save a soul." And yet, even here, division brews. East and West no longer agree. The Bishop of Rome and the Patriarch of Constantinople write letters, sometimes with blessings, often with scorn. Doctrines split hairs until they bleed. Councils meet, declare, condemn. What was once one church now teeters toward fracture, but still the people kneel at the roadside shrines, beneath broken arches, in cellars by candlelight, in the fields under the rain with arms raised. They pray because they must, because it is the only act left that still feels whole. You try to understand this kind of faith, not comfortable, not cushioned, but raw, trembling, full of need. It does not explain the world, it pleads with it. This is not your kind of religion. There are no orderly pews, no sermons on self-improvement, no faith woven with certainty. This is a faith for end times, for people who watch the roof leak and wonder if the sky itself is breaking. You could not survive it, not because it is false, but because it is too heavy. It asks you to believe while your children starve, to kneel while your world collapses, to sing while cities burn. It is not the faith of empire, it is the faith of embers, and in such dim light you would not last. You arrive by foot, walking the same worn stone roads once carved by legions and traced by merchants, envoys, poets, and emperors. The sun hangs low in a dusty sky, and ahead, framed by fields long left untended, the city rises, or rather, it rests, not like a beast, proud and pulsing, but like an old statue half buried by earth. Its gates are open, its walls crumbling, its towers skeletal. This was once a city with a name, one recorded in imperial dispatches, echoed in speeches, carved on milestones and coins. Perhaps it was Florentia, or Mediolanum, or Colonia Agrippina. The name survives on maps in dusty archives, but no one here speaks it now. They call it simply the town. And in a way, that is what it has become. Not a city, but a space. A space where people remain. A space where memory lingers, clinging like ivy to broken columns. You pass beneath a triumphal arch. It is blackened by soot, the names upon it nearly unreadable. Grass grows from its cracks. A child has scratched crude drawings of animals on its base. Nearby, the forum is eerily quiet. One stall remains, a tanner selling strips of cured leather. The rest of the square is empty, save for pigeons and wind. What happened? Time, neglect, fear, and perhaps most of all, forgetting. Rome's cities were once the pride of the world, structured, humming, adorned with libraries, theatres, markets, courts. Their design was deliberate, a grid of order and aspiration. But order requires maintenance. Aspiration requires hope. In the final century, both are scarce. The baths are cold now, their domes cracked. The aqueducts that once brought water from mountains now drip like failing veins. The pipes are rusted, the cisterns dry. You find one man hauling buckets from a nearby stream. He tells you the baths have not functioned since his grandfather's day. We boil water when we can, he says. Otherwise, we endure the cold. The amphitheatre is silent. Its arches are home to goats. In the arena, weeds bloom, green, stubborn, soft. You walk its perimeter and imagine the cheers that once rose here. Now only echoes remain. You enter the decayed remnants of a basilica, once a centre for law and order. The walls still stand, their paint flaking in long curls. The magistrate's bench is intact, but no one sits behind it. The law is no longer pronounced here. Disputes are settled in courtyards, with knives or prayers or silent agreement. The people are few, and they are tired. Many have fled to the countryside, where food grows and taxes arrive more slowly. Those who remain are the stubborn, the poor, the faithful, and the forgotten. Some hold on to titles, the curiales, once proud members of the city council, now cursed with the duty to collect taxes that will never be paid, to host games that will never be funded, to preserve rituals with no audience. You meet one, a man, named Severus, his robe carefully stitched, his beard neatly trimmed. He shows you the city's archives, stored in a half-collapsed room behind the basilica. Scrolls of decrees, names of citizens, tallies of grain deliveries. No one reads them, he says, but I cannot let them rot. He is a custodian of ghosts. You visit the city gates at sunset. A group of men and women gather, each from different provinces. Their Latin thick with other tongues. They wait, hoping for word from the road. Supplies, news, a letter from a son serving in the eastern provinces. Nothing comes. The gatehouse is unmanned. The guards have not been paid in months. Even the streets have changed. The polished stone is broken in places, replaced with packed dirt. Sewers overflow in the rain. Rats crawl beneath the cobbles. The street names are still there, scratched into weather-worn signs. Via Sacra, Decumanus Maximus, but no one calls them that now. The big road, they say, the one that leads to the well. And yet life endures. A bakery still burns its coals, though only a few loaves are baked each day. A shoemaker works with scrap leather, crafting sandals for men who barter in salted fish. A small schoolhouse hosts 6 children. The teacher has only one scroll, and half of it is missing. Still, he teaches them to spell Roma. You ask him why. He bothers. Because if they forget that word, then all is lost. There is something deeply human in these places. A stubbornness. A quiet vow. Even as roofs collapse and vines reclaim the walls, the people plant herbs in broken amphorae. They paint saints on the inside of old Roman temples. They ring bells cast from melted tools. They light candles for ancestors whose names are fading, but whose presence is still felt. In some districts, parts of the city have been abandoned completely. Walls too dangerous to dwell in, columns too unstable, whole neighborhoods given over to silence. You walk those streets and feel as if the buildings are watching you, not with malice, but with melancholy, like they remember when they mattered. At night, the stars shimmer above the ruins. Fires flicker in courtyards. The silence deepens, not empty, but thick with things unspoken. You lie in a room that once housed a merchant family. The ceiling, is cracked. The mosaic beneath your feet depicts a sea god no one prays to anymore. Outside, someone sings a lullaby in a dialect you cannot place. It is gentle, old, sad, and you think of your world, of cities full of lights, grids that pulse with digital life, towers that stretch beyond clouds. You think of maps that make sense, of street names that are remembered, of buildings with numbers and addresses and function. This city has no number. Its function is memory. It is a civic ghost. And here, you would not last, because your feet are trained for cities that grow, not cities that fade. You hold a letter in your hand. The wax seal is faded, the parchment brittle at the edges, the script, formal Latin, still clear but hesitant. It is a letter from a father to his son, written in Ravenna and meant for a village in the hills beyond, Florencia. It is short, kind. A father's words wrapped in small updates, the health of the household, news of the bishop's arrival, a reminder to stay warm as winter closes in. A closing line: "May God keep you, my son, and may this letter find you swiftly." It never did. You found it in a drawer in a ruined villa, untouched by time but unread, unsent, unknown. That is what communication means in the late Empire. Not a thread that binds, but a thread that frays. Rome once prided itself on its roads, viae that stretched like arteries across the world, paved and measured, patrolled and charted. Couriers rode from Londinium to Antioch with orders, poetry, gossip, and news. Governors corresponded. Soldiers sent tokens home. Families wrote across seas. The imperial post, cursus publicus, was fast, disciplined, revered. Now, it is mostly gone. The roads remain, but the riders are fewer. The stations unmanned. The hostels collapsed. The great wheels of communication have rusted into silence. You try to send a message, a short note, just a few lines, addressed to a friend in another city. You ask a local if he knows a courier. He laughs. "You can wait," he says, "but the waiting will kill the message." You ask if there's a cart headed in that direction. He shrugs. "Maybe in 2 weeks, maybe next season." You ask a priest. He nods kindly. "I'll give it to a merchant I trust. He passes through once every few months. If he remembers." He does not finish the sentence. You begin to see the reality. Most letters now never arrive. They are lost in forests, stolen by bandits, soaked by rain, or simply forgotten. Even when they do arrive, they often reach wrong doors. Town names are no longer reliable. Borders have changed. Some cities share names. Others have been renamed by new warlords. The address you write may no longer exist. So the letters pile up, in trunks, in satchels, in the memory of men who meant to deliver them but never could. A soldier shows you a bundle of such letters, 20 in all, bound with a red thread. "They were for comrades," he says. "Mothers, wives, friends. They died before I could hand them over." You ask if he read them. He nods. Once, but not again. You visit a monastery where monks copy scripture and letters from older scrolls, preserving what they can. One shows you a missive from an imperial general, dated nearly 30 years past. "We do not know if it ever reached its destination," he says, "but we copied it anyway. It was beautiful." In some places, communication lives on, but only in fragments. Messages scratched onto wooden tablets, handed from stranger to stranger. News passed orally across trade routes, changed with every telling. An event in the East may take a year to be known in the West, by which point it is a legend, not a fact, and rumors. The empire breathes rumors like air, that the emperor has died. Again. That the Visigoths have sacked another city. That the Nile has dried. That the sea is closed. That a new Messiah has been born in a Gallic cave. That the last true heir of Rome lives in hiding beneath a temple, guarded by wolves and angels. You try to sort truth from fiction. It is impossible. Even educated men quote hearsay. Even bishops read flawed letters as gospel. Even generals plan by guesses. You understand. Now why so many choose silence? Why so many speak only of what they see with their own eyes? Because anything else is uncertain. Even memory is fragile. You sit with an old widow who once lived in Antioch. She tells you stories of letters her husband sent. Long letters, describing festivals and governors and temple fires. You ask if she kept them. No, she says. I memorized them. That was enough. And then she pauses. Though I wonder if I remember them right. That too is the danger. When letters vanish, memory must carry everything. And memory, like parchment, frays. The empire shrinks inward. Each town is a world, each valley a mystery. Even when people speak the same tongue, their meanings diverge. A word in Ravenna sounds strange in Carthage. A proverb in Gaul confuses a Roman from Numidia. Language itself is splintering. In such a world, your own skills betray you. You are trained to read quickly, to write efficiently, to trust that your words will travel. But here, speed is meaningless. Ink is expensive. Trust is brittle. You write. Another letter, this time to no one. Just thoughts folded in a scrap of linen. You hide it beneath a stone near a dry well. Perhaps someone will find it. Perhaps not. And you feel something ache within you. Not your feet, not your back, but that deeper part, the one that longs to connect. Rome's collapse is not only the fall of stone and law. It is the collapse of the in-between, of every line that once tied person to person, town to town, heart to heart. You would not last in this silence, not because you could not speak, but because no one could answer. The throne of Rome once stood like a mountain, immovable, radiant, feared. Its shadow stretched across the known world, and its wearer shaped the lives of millions with a gesture. Caesar, Augustus, Trajan, Marcus, all names that echoed like thunder down marble halls. But now the throne sits in shadow, and those who sit upon it do so trembling, knowing full well that they rule nothing but illusion. You first hear of the emperor's name in the forum of a middling town. A proclamation is read aloud by a clerk with a wavering voice. The emperor, blessed and eternal, sends greetings. He begins. But before he finishes, a woman snorts. A man spits in the dirt. A child whispers, "Which emperor?" No one answers. The reading continues. No one listens. The emperor now is not in Rome. He has not been there in years. He resides in Ravenna, tucked behind marshes and moats, protected by the natural world more than by legions. It is a city safe from siege, but also from sight. The throne is hidden, not exalted. You travel to Ravenna, through woods and wetlands, and find the palace. It is still there, ornate in places, rusting in others. Guards stand at the gates, but they do not wear matching uniforms. Some speak Gothic, some Latin. Few know the laws they are meant to enforce. Inside, the emperor sits in state. He is young, 17, his robe too large, his hands too clean. He does not speak without permission. Around him circle men of age and ambition, generals, bishops, eunuchs, scribes. Each speaks softly in his ear. Each pulls at the fabric of his will. He is not a ruler. He is a stage. His name? Perhaps Valentinian, or Honorius, or Petronius. You've lost track. So have many others. The names change too quickly now. Some emperors last a year, others mere months. A general raises one, a rival poisons him, a bishop names another, a warlord dethrones him. Rome no longer has emperors. It has pretenders with pageantry. You watch a coronation. The boy is led into the basilica by trembling priests. A crown, too large, is placed upon his head. The crowd chants his name. For a moment, he smiles. For a moment, he believes. Then, he is led to a room, given ink and scroll, and told to sign decrees he cannot read. He is emperor in seal alone. The true power lies with men who wear no crown. One is a magister militum, master of soldiers, a general who commands the loyalty of the army. His tunic is stained, his face scarred, his sword never far from hand. He rarely speaks in council, but when he does, all fall silent. Even the emperor. Another is a bishop, elderly, eloquent, his fingers heavy with rings. His sermons sway towns more than laws. He speaks of divine will, of sacred rule, of the emperor as God's steward. But he rules not through fire, but through whispers, and his reach extends beyond borders. These men, and others like them, make and unmake emperors. Sometimes they are Roman, often they are not. Ricimer, Gundobad, Odoacer, names that would once have been unthinkable beside the laureled names of Augustus and Hadrian. But in this twilight world, they are the kingmakers. Barbarians in blood, Romans by convenience. They swear loyalty, they wear Roman brooches, but they do not kneel. You ask one official how an emperor is chosen now. He smirks. A general must need a puppet. A priest must bless him, and the army must be paid. He pauses. After that, all you need is parchment. And the people, they do not revolt, they do not rise, they endure. For them, the emperor has become like the weather, a distant thing, capricious and beyond control. They watch as new coins are minted with new faces. They do not expect protection. They do not expect justice. Only taxes, only decrees, that pass like storms. Even the symbols have decayed. The imperial purple, once reserved for emperors alone, now appears in the cloaks of bishops and generals. The diadem, once the sacred marker of imperial identity, is sometimes worn by children during local festivals. The eagle standard is rusted, forgotten in armories. No one chants Ave Caesar, with belief. You meet a former court scribe, he keeps, to a small home on the edge of Ravenna. In his youth, he copied imperial edicts, wrote speeches, attended coronations. There was a boy, he says, crowned on a Tuesday, murdered by Friday. I still have the speech I wrote for his feast. Day. No one ever read it. He shows you the scroll. It is beautiful. Useless. That is what the emperors are now. Beautiful. Useless. The East still sends letters to the West, addressing the emperor with titles that mean nothing. Dominus Noster, Pontifex Maximus, Victor of the Nations. The scribes write them with straight faces, but the East knows the truth. Constantinople watches as the West crumbles and sends condolences disguised as diplomacy. One day, there will be no more emperors in the West, but the world will not notice immediately, for the empire has already begun to live without them. And you, born in a world where power implies purpose, would not understand this. You think a crown means command. You think a throne implies strength. But here, the crown is a collar, the throne a stage, and power walks without robes. You would not last here, not because it is dangerous, but because it is hollow, and hollow things do not echo back. There is smoke on the hills. You see it before you hear anything. Thin tendrils rising against the pale blue sky, lazy as incense, drifting over the olive groves like fingers brushing the earth. At first, you think it might be a hearth fire, a farmer clearing brush, A signal, perhaps. But then the wind shifts and the scent reaches you. Not wood, but hair. Not pine, but flesh. War has come again. Not as legions, not as declarations, not as tidy formations with trumpets and standards, but as something older, more primal, a swarm, a hunger, an inevitability. The village prepares not with speeches, but with routine. Doors are barred, lamps extinguished, animals led into the churches, children hidden beneath floorboards, women bury rings and amulets in the corners of gardens. No one screams, no one panics. It is not the first time. For them, war is no longer a disruption. It is the weather. One speaks of it like the rain. It will pass, or it won't. Another shrugs. It was the Burgundians last time. Perhaps it is the Huns now, or soldiers who wear no name. You ask who defends them. They laugh. We defend ourselves, or we run. There are no standing garrisons here. The empire cannot spare them. The army is stretched, fractured, preoccupied with protecting coasts, or escorting grain shipments, or guarding petty kings. The interior is left to its own devices. Small bands of militiamen, half-trained, half-armed, wholly uncertain. You hear a rider approach. Dust kicks behind him. He wears a patchwork of armor and carries a chipped spear. His horse is gaunt. He shouts something, too fast to catch. But the villagers understand. They begin to scatter. You follow. Through the woods, along goat paths and dry stream beds, they move like water, silent, practiced, grim. You ask where they go. An old man replies, "There is a cave. It's not much, but it's deep." He holds a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside is bread, a rosary, and a rusted dagger. This is survival, refined by repetition. You reach the cave. It is cold, damp, small. The children cry until their mothers hush them. The fire is not lit. The smoke would be seen. Someone prays aloud, not to God, but to an ancestor. Help us see another morning. Outside, the night grows louder, not with war cries, but with horses, with metal on stone, with low commands in strange accents. You do not look, you do not speak. You curl into the dark and listen. A scream pierces the hills, then silence, then another. You close your eyes. You are not brave. You are not prepared. At dawn, the smoke is thicker. The village is gone, not leveled, but emptied. Doors torn, pots broken, chickens slaughtered. What food there was is now ashes. One man's body lies near the well. His eyes are open, his jaw unhinged. No one goes near him. A woman picks up a doll from the ash. Her daughter is not found. You help bury the man. You say nothing. There is nothing to say. This is not a story of conquest, not a great war between empires. These are skirmishes without strategy, raids without banners. War is not planned. It arrives, carried by hunger, by exile, by revenge. Sometimes it is foreign tribes, driven by need or opportunity. Sometimes it is Roman soldiers, unpaid and bitter. Sometimes it is the very men meant to protect you. Loyalty is scarce, food scarcer. You travel with a caravan of survivors, peasants, monks, merchants. They speak in low voices, trading names of other towns. Ravaged, burned, held fast. A woman says her brother fled to a monastery in the north. They have thick walls, she says, and a saint's bones. You see other refugees, moving in clumps, faces wrapped against dust, eyes sunken from travel. No one stops long. No one speaks of the past. Only of the next road, the next shelter, the next hope. In some towns, walls have been raised anew, not by imperial engineers, but by citizens. Crude, rough, but tall enough to stall a horseman. Inside, there is fear, but also order. The gates are locked at sunset. Scouts are posted. The bell tower is always manned. You stay a night in such a place. You are safe, but you do not sleep. At dinner, a man says he once served in the legions. "We were 20,000 strong in Gaul," he says. "Now I hold a gate with a farmhand and a priest." Even memory has grown weary. The stories of Rome's great wars, Cannae, Zama, the conquest of Dacia, are recited with reverence, but they feel unreal. This war is not glorious. It leaves no statues, no scrolls, no songs, only scars. You see children learning to shoot arrows before they learn to write, women who carry knives in their belts, monks who bless swords with river water. A world where peace is not the norm, but the rare reprieve. And yet, there is persistence. The villagers return to their ruins. They rebuild. They light fires from the charred wood. They replant. They bury what they cannot save. A boy places stones in a circle where his home once stood. His mother watches. She does not stop him, because this is what you do after war. You continue. But you, stranger from a safer age, you do not know how. You are stunned by the quiet between battles. You are unaccustomed to planning escape routes as you break bread. You cannot live in a world where war is not an event, but an atmosphere. And so you would not last. Because when war is the weather, you must learn to breathe smoke and call it air. The smoke has cleared now. The city is quiet, not peaceful, just spent. You walk beneath arches where ivy now serves as ornament, through libraries turned into stables, past shrines whose statues are headless, but still adorned with fresh flowers. Everything here speaks with two voices, one of ruin and one of reverence. This is what remains. This is what they tried to save. Not the empire, not the marble, but something quieter, something nearly invisible, an idea, a rhythm, a name. Rome, not as it was, but as it meant. You find a woman sweeping the floor of an old atrium. Half the roof has collapsed, and the mosaic beneath her broom is stained by weather and ash. She doesn't look up as you approach. "This was my father's house," she says, "and his father's before him. There used to be 5 families in this villa. Now only I remain." She pauses. "I sweep because they swept." She gestures to a small shrine in the corner, bare, save for a single oil lamp. "We kept the yai, hearth lit for 1,000 years," she whispers, "even when there was no fire." You sit with her in silence, because what can you say? What do you say to a world that tried so hard to remain itself, even as it fell? They preserved what they could. Some hoarded books, carried them across mountains, hid them in caves, buried them in walls. You find a codex beneath a floorboard, a fragment of Cicero, wrapped in waxed cloth, its letters faded but intact. It was not hidden for profit, only for memory. Some preserved law, not the grand pronouncements of emperors, but local customs. How? To settle disputes over grain or inheritance or boundaries, etched into tablets, passed by word of mouth. You hear a magistrate recite from memory the 12 tables, though he admits he understands only half the words now. Some preserved beauty. A girl strings coloured beads into patterns once worn by patricians. A potter continues to carve laurel, wreaths into his bowls, though few recognise the symbol. A priest chants hymns in Latin so old it has become a kind of music, notes without meaning, but full of weight, and some preserved pain. A mother tells her children stories of the empire, not as glory, but as caution. She speaks of cities burned, of fields gone fallow, of promises unkept. Her Rome is not marble, it is ashes. But she makes the children remember, because memory is the last gift they can give. They could not save the aqueducts. They could not save the Senate. They could not save the peace. But they saved the habit of remembering. And that habit, that quiet insistence that something mattered once, became the seed of all that would come after. You visit a monastery high in the hills. Its walls are rough, but its scriptorium warm. A monk shows you a copy of Augustine's City of God. It was nearly lost, he says. We heard a raider used it as kindling, but one leaf survived. He smiles. That was enough. You ask him why they keep copying, even as the world grows darker. He shrugs. Because the world will need it later, even if we do not. That is the tone you hear everywhere. Not triumph, not defiance, but something deeper. A resigned devotion. A sense that though the body is dying, the breath might survive. And yet, not everything was preserved. Some things they let go, had to let go. The great public games, with their gladiators and chariots, gone. The Senate's rituals, the pomp of civic life, gone. The old Latin, the precise tongue of Cicero, gone or mutated beyond repair. Even some gods were allowed to fade. You walk into a rural temple, once sacred to Apollo. Now its columns are weathered, and the inner sanctum holds a cross carved from firewood. The villagers still step inside. They still kneel, but they do not know the name of the god who once stood there, and they do not mind. You ask an old man if he misses the old Rome. He looks at you and says, I don't know what that is. And perhaps that is the hardest truth. The people of the 5th century were not living in Rome's fall. They were living after it. Even as the walls still stood, they did not watch a giant fall. They watched its shadow fade, and shadows fade slowly. You walk through the ruins and realize that this world you thought of as collapsing had already, in many ways, collapsed long before. It just hadn't admitted it. And that is what made it beautiful, tragic, enduring. The people lit candles in broken windows. They told stories in ruined houses. They kept teaching, even when no students came. They kept burying their dead with rites, even when the priests were gone. They refused to say goodbye, because Rome had been their mother, their teacher, their mirror. And you, born in a world where systems work and decline is an article, not a life, you would not last here, because you expect things to be saved. And, here, they only endure. What they leave behind is not gold. It is not armies. It is not maps. It is habit. It is grit. It is a memory whispered into a child's ear beside a hearth lit for no reason other than hope. That is the inheritance. And ash is part of it. There is no trumpet to mark the hour, no decree, no curtain fall. Only morning light sifting through broken shutters and the wind carrying dust where senators once walked. This is the last century of Rome, and it doesn't feel like collapse. It feels like trying to light a candle in a wind that does not stop, trying to remember words that no longer hold meaning, trying to tell your children why the statues are headless, why the streets have no names, why the walls were once important. You would not last here. Not because of fear or famine or flame, but because of the weight of quiet, a quiet that holds too much. Here grief is not shouted, it is carried, folded into cloth, pressed into bread, breathed into lullabies. And still they rise. Still they open shop. Still they sweep doorways to homes missing roofs. Because here, to stop moving is to admit the end. And no one dares name the end out loud. You would not last because you were raised in a world that makes sense. A world of beginnings and conclusions, of cause and effect, of justice served and progress expected. But Rome's last century offers none of these. Here, the future is fog, the past is broken, the present is all that exists, and even it arrives with cracks. You walk through what was once a forum. There are weeds now, and wild dogs, and boys who play with rusted coins they do not recognize. A blind man tells you where the statue of Jupiter once stood. He points with certainty, and you believe him. Even though nothing remains but shadow, you think history is what is written down. But here, history is remembered in bones, in a scar on a man's hand, in the way a widow looks at a crumbling wall and whispers, "My father helped build that." You listen to a priest recite the Mass in Latin that no longer flows easily from his tongue. He stumbles, he forgets, he invents, but no one minds. Because it's not the words that matter anymore. It's that someone is still saying them, that someone still believes in a morning worth waking to. You wouldn't last because you expect meaning. But here, there is only motion. A woman kneads dough in silence, shaping loaves as her grandmother once did, though the grain is coarse and the oven cracked. She does not expect thanks. She does not speak of empire. She makes bread because it is her turn to keep something warm in the world. You ask yourself, what is Rome now? Not the Palatine Hill, not the Senate, not even the legions. Rome is a boy, dragging water up a hill, a grandmother spinning wool from a sheep no one can name, a girl tracing her finger over letters carved by hands long dead. You wouldn't last because you'd keep waiting for the story to make sense. But this isn't a story. It's a holding on. It's a letter sent with no hope of reply. It's a ring buried beneath a tree, not for hiding, but for remembering. It's a lullaby hummed in a language half forgotten to a child who may never learn why it matters. This is how Rome ends, not with collapse, but with carrying, not with fire, but with folded cloth and patient hands. You sit beside a man who once was a senator's son. Now, he carves bowls and sells them to passers-by who pay in barter, not coin. He does not mourn what was lost. My father held speeches in the Curia, he says. I hold silence in my shop. And he smiles, not in bitterness, but in surrender. The dignified kind. You were taught that power is in crowns and banners, but here, power is a door that opens each morning. A song that is sung, even if no one listens. A fire lit with no promise that it will burn through the night. You wouldn't last because you'd ask, what is the point? But they do not ask that. They do not have the time to question the meaning. They are too busy surviving. And in their survival, something ancient breathes, not the glory of conquest, but the nobility of the quiet act, of sweeping, of stitching, of kneeling in a room with no roof and saying a prayer anyway. So no, you wouldn't last a day in Rome's final century. But if you did, if you stayed long enough to learn the silences, to listen rather than speak, to watch rather than fix, you might carry something back with you, a fragment of memory, a habit of gentleness, a reverence for what remains. And in that, perhaps, you would understand. Rome is not dead. She is remembered, not in statues, but in gestures, not in laws, but in love.